right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Nicholas Black. I'm our co-public relations chair for the University of Kansas Young Democrats. I'm joined here today by our other co-PR chair, Penny, who will be up here in just a moment to speak with you. Just like to say thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate it. As you're aware, we have a very important election coming up here in Kansas. We have the midterms in which we'll be choosing our new governor to replace Laura Kelly, who's now going out after winning 2 terms consecutively. We have 2 wonderful candidates here to lead our state forward, and we think it's best that you hear from them. So with that said, we do have Penny up here who will be reading our questions. Thank you so much again for being here. Thank you to the Douglas County, Kansas Democrats, the Euphoria and Emporia Dems, and to our wonderful friends in Shawnee County who helped boost this event through social media. We appreciate it so much. With that said, I'll invite Penny up and we'll begin our questioning.
Hello. As Nick just introduced, I'm Kenneth Woodward. I'm the co-PR chair, and I will be asking our lovely candidates their questions today.
All right. Well, good evening. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the Young Democrat chapters who helped put this on, the Douglas County Young Dems, the Kansas Young Dems, and the KU Young Dems. My name is Ethan Corson. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a lifelong Kansan, and I'm running to be the next governor of our great state. And as I was driving down here and being back on a campus, it made me think about how I first got involved in politics. So growing up in Kansas, I was really just focused on baseball. But then when I got to college, my classes really started to open my eyes to the world around me. And I remember one day I was walking through the political science building, and I saw on the bulletin board a sign for a college Democrats meeting. And so the first political thing that I ever did in my life was attend a college Democrats meeting. And that served as a springboard for a career in public service that has been incredibly rewarding. It has taken me from working on campaigns and organizing to federal government service, to serving in the state government, to now running for governor. And to me, the most rewarding thing, and the thing that I really want to say to the young people in the audience today about public service, is that it is a chance to be part of something larger than yourself. And, you know, being back in college also made me think about what it was like to be in my early 20s, to have the kind of same questions that I'm sure many of the students here today have. Questions about what kind of job am I going to be able to get when I graduate? Am I ever going to be able to buy a home? How am I ever going to pay off these student loans? And is Kansas the right place for me to build my life? And those questions are central to my gubernatorial campaign. I'm running for governor because Kansas should be a place where young people can have a great middle-class life. It should be a place where you should find a good paid job, an exciting career, and you should be able to own a home, send your kids to a great public school, and afford to raise your family here in Kansas. And Kansas is at an inflection point with this election. The question is really, are we going to go forward and continue to build on the progress that we've made under Governor Kelly's leadership? Or are we going to go backwards to the extreme failed policies of the past? It gives me so much hope to see the young people here today. You know, let's also write this next chapter for our state with fresh new leadership. Across the country, there is a real demand for having younger leaders who have a modern perspective on the challenges facing young people and facing Kansas families today. As somebody who's still paying off their student loans, I understand what that looks like. I understand the challenges around trying to buy your first home, the cost of childcare, the affordability of childcare. Those are all things that I'm living today. When I'm sworn into office next year, I will be the youngest Democratic governor in the entire country. And it matters to have leaders who are experiencing the same things as the people that they seek to govern. So thank you again for having me. Let's write the next great chapter for our state together.
all so much for being here this evening. It's great to see you all. I'm Senator Cindy Holscher, the Democratic front runner for governor of this great state of Kansas. So again, thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to be here at KU, partly because next year I will have a Jayhawk here. My youngest will be here, so I'm extremely excited about that. As I've gone across the state talking to people, I will tell you this, the affordability crisis is looming large and Kansans are struggling. And there's no one who knows more about making ends meet and stretching resources than myself. I'm the daughter of a union worker. I'm a union member myself. I come from a family of military family. My dad was a Marine, my oldest brother an Army veteran. Additionally, I'm the granddaughter of tenant farmers, the poorest of the poor. So stretching resources, like I said, that's what we did my entire life. Public education and a good union job, that was key to my family's success in rising out of poverty. And that's probably why I fight so hard for working families as well as public education. And as a first-generation college student, I fight especially hard for public education. In 2016, you all may remember, Governor Brownback's failed experiment was happening. And at that time, I saw a problem. We were hemorrhaging teachers, we were hemorrhaging supplies in our schools, and there was a big problem that needed to be fixed. So I stepped forward and decided to run for state representative. However, I will tell you, members in the party, members of the establishment, told me to stay put and said that I wasn't, quote, connected to the right type of people. But I'm connected to hardworking, regular, everyday Kansans. So I stepped forward and I ran. And not only did I win in a red district, but I won every single precinct and sent a 3-term Republican in that red district packing and never to return again. In my time, I've taken out 2 Republican incumbents, winning 4 elections in red districts, something no other Democrat has done. Additionally, I'm the only Democrat in the entire legislature to defeat those Republican incumbents. Those are the toughest types of elections to win. And it's going to take somebody with that type of skill set to win this race in Kansas, a red state. And that is probably why I have more than a 20-point lead over my closest opponent in this primary. Not only do I win the tough races, but I deliver results. I will tell you this, the mission of this organization, KU Young Dems, it's so important in terms of getting young folks to vote, getting them engaged, getting them to run for office. Because I would tell you, there's 3 candidates in this primary right now. We're all in our 40s and 50s, but by the state legislature standards, we're young. And I want you to think about that. And I'll tell you this, that's got to be fixed. And I've been working to fix that since I entered the legislature. In my first term, I started petitioning campaign finance to change the rules on using campaign funds for child care. At that time, you could use funds to buy a lamp, but you couldn't use it to make sure your kids were safe while you were out campaigning. And as a result of that work, campaign funds can now be used by candidates to ensure that their children are safe and to be used for child care. My kids were in middle school at that point, so it didn't benefit me, but that's okay, because I wanted to make sure that others could come along, because I want to make sure that we have diversification in terms of young folks and minorities in the legislature. Additionally, I worked hard to recruit females and minorities to run for office. I'll tell you this, the Holscher gubernatorial administration will be much more representative of our population. And very importantly, as a female, I always bring more with me, and I never pull up the ladder behind me. I know this is going to be a tough election, and frankly, that's why I stepped forward to win. This November, we're going to need somebody who knows how to win in red districts, who knows how to deliver change in Topeka. And that's who I am, a fighter for the people, and that's why I'm running to be your next governor.
Can I steal one of those numbers?
Oh. No.
I can be loud, but I don't imagine people want to hear me more clearly. 2 notes before we begin. First of all, we will be capping answers at about 3 minutes. That way, we don't end up jabbering on for too long. I know everyone here probably likes talking. And second, I believe, Nicholas, you'll be handling the cards Once again, I know some people have shown up after that was first announced. There are note cards and pins over there for you to write your own questions. We only have 4 of pre-written questions for the candidates, and we will be picking 5 of the ones from over there to ask them. Now, to the main event. Our first question. According to the Kansas Board of Regents, 42% of public university graduates leave the state after earning their degrees. At a time when young people are questioning whether they can build a future here, they want to know, how will you work to promote job creation and ensure that young people not only stay in Kansas, but see a real future for themselves here? We'll start with you, Ethan.
Look, no matter where you live in Kansas, whether it's a big city or a small town, you deserve the opportunity to work hard, to have a good paying job, and to have a chance to be in the middle class. You know, I look at this really through the eyes of a parent. I have 2 boys who are 6 and 2, and the conversation that my wife Jenna and I always have about them is that we want 2 things for them. We want them to be able to accomplish whatever it is they decide that they want to accomplish. But the second thing, and the most important thing, is we don't want them to feel like they need to leave Kansas to do it. And so, as governor, I am going to be incredibly focused on continuing the economic development success that we've had under Governor Laura Kelly and Lieutenant Governor David Tolan, both who have endorsed me, because they know that I have what it takes to continue to bring more jobs and businesses into Kansas. I was Chief of Staff of the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce. So I know what it means to recruit, attract, retain businesses and jobs in our state. And I want those jobs to be good paid jobs that are going to allow Kansans to enter the middle class. In addition to bringing jobs and businesses, we need to make Kansas more affordable. Our goal as a state, and my goal as your next governor, will be to make Kansas the most affordable state in the country, to have a middle class quality of life. That's why in January, I announced my Working Families Agenda, which laid out specific policies I'm going to implement to keep more money in the pockets of working families and to drive down costs. Because one of the key attractions of Kansas has always been its affordability, and that is starting to slip away for too many Kansans, particularly our youngest Kansans. That means we need to have an aggressive state goal of building 100,000 housing units a year. Because housing ownership is the underpinning of the middle class. And for too many young Kansans, they feel like they will never be able to own their home. That is wrong, and I'm going to change that as governor. So whether it's establishing a child tax credit, making home ownership possible for more folks, or bringing in good jobs and businesses, I'm going to wake up every single day as governor thinking about how we can make a Kansas where more young people like my boys will want to make the same decision that my wife Jenna and I did, to build our life right here in Kansas.
I will tell you, this is a very relevant, very personal question to me because I have 3 children. 2 of them ended up going out of state for college. Because guess what? Some of those other states had offerings just as good as right here in terms of what we have for in-state tuition. And that's an absolute shame because our state offers exceptional education. We've done a fine job in terms of my kids educating them in the elementary level as well as high school level, only to lose them and have that brain drain and have them go elsewhere. These are 3 kids who graduate at the top of their classes. And again, 2 of them ended up going out of state. They should have come here. But we weren't offering enough at that time to get them to stay here. That has to be addressed. And the second part of that has to be addressed is the fact that you shouldn't have to go to college and acquire tens of thousands of dollars in debt just to get a degree. That shouldn't happen. That's wrong. And the fact that that happens sets our students back. It sets our young people back in terms of those life events, in terms of being able to buy a home, in terms of making those decisions, in terms of starting a family. And that's wrong, and we have to address those issues. And I'll tell you this, when my husband and I, after we graduated college and decided where we were going to settle down, it was a no-brainer. We decided Kansas, because Kansas at that time was doing a much better job of investing in communities and investing in our schools. And with this supermajority of extremists that is taking over our legislature, those things have been threatened, and it's becoming harder and harder. And in fact, what we're seeing too is stagnation. $7.25 an hour. That's the current minimum wage in this state. I brought forward a bill this session to raise it to $16 an hour. Now, the supermajority of the extremists didn't grant it a hearing, but it sure did get a lot of talk and a lot of traction, because we haven't raised the minimum wage in years. We are past due. The critics will say, well, we can't raise the minimum wage because it'll make costs go up. But you all already know, costs have already gone up. And wages have been stagnant. We have to address that issue. And as governor, we will address that issue. We'll address the minimum wage issue. We'll prioritize stronger investments in our colleges. Additionally, I will focus on investing in economic growth in this state and create good paying jobs. For over a decade, I worked at Sprint. And part of my job, or part of my functions there, were creating revenue streams and job development. I know how to create jobs that pay well. I have literally won awards for my expertise in this area. I know how to get those things done. And I will fight to fully fund our schools, including special education, something we haven't done since 2011. And that hurts all of our students, and it hurts all of our communities. I raised my family in Kansas because I saw a prosperous future for us here, and we're going to return it to that. Thank you.
Hey, there's a second one. Thank you both. Our second question. On the ballot this year, there is an amendment to reshape the Kansas Supreme Court in an effort to make judicial elections partisan. At the same time, several bills have been introduced in the legislature that directly challenge reproductive rights across the state. Many Kansans view these efforts as a coordinated attempt to erode established protections which voters have already affirmed their support for at the ballot box. As governor, what specific actions would you take to safeguard reproductive rights and ensure they remain secure and protected in Kansas? Cindy, we'll start with you this time.
So let me say this. First and foremost, I can stack my record up to anyone's on this issue. And the same can be said when it comes to protecting our neighbors from ICE overreach. Same can be said when we're talking about protecting LGBTQA neighbors from attacks by the legislature, which we have seen over and over again by this body of extremists. And when it comes to advocating on the Senate floor for all of these issues, it's me you will find standing up and speaking out every single time. I show up and I fight for our people. And regarding access to reproductive health care, there are several components on this issue. First and foremost, again, Kansans overwhelmingly decided this issue in 2022. Yet, this extremist legislature keeps bringing forward more bills to try to erode access to reproductive health care, and a new amendment to try to do the same. I would tell you, 2022 was a hard-fought victory. I knocked thousands of doors that summer, so many that a news crew literally followed me for part of the summer to capture the work that I was doing. And we have to keep pushing back against this, and we have to do our jobs as people out there, as voters, to remind others to get out and vote in August and to vote no. I simply tell people, if you came out in August of 2022 and voted no, you gotta come out and do it again. Second issue, when we talk about reproductive health care, is access to maternity health care. We have seen a lot of hospitals close across the state. And what this means is that we have a number of people who have to drive hours for access to care. That's dangerous and that's concerning. The strain on our rural hospitals is real. And something that would help us there in terms of preventing more closures, Medicaid expansion. And a third component, this current extremist body has shown it has no appetite for listening to the will of the people. I am working right now on helping flip some of those seats so that we can start moving in a different direction. And I will tell you, as governor, I will veto bills that are not in line with the will of the people. And I will take court action as necessary. On this issue in particular, when we're talking about reproductive health care, I have the lived experience of knowing this very struggle in my bones and knowing what it's like to think about the potential loss of rights that can happen with the results of an election. That's something my opponents in this race can never truly understand and can only read about.
Reproductive rights are at stake in both this August, but also this November. That's why we have to defeat this amendment, but it's why we also have to have a Democratic nominee this November who can actually win a general election statewide. The world was rocked when Roe versus Wade was overturned in June of 2022. And Kansas was where all eyes in the country turned. My wife Jenna and I, we got out with so many of you in this room, and we knocked those doors. We had those difficult conversations with our neighbors, and Kansans resoundingly spoke. They said that they wanted to protect reproductive health care. And now, coming from the Republicans, we have another amendment that is designed to undermine the will of the people. Kansas Republicans know that their position is not popular, and that is why they are trying to get this result through an amendment that they say is about the courts, but that we all know is truly about our reproductive health care in Kansas. There is so much at stake, both in August and November, and nobody knows what is at stake more than Planned Parenthood. That's why Planned Parenthood endorsed me over my opponent, because Planned Parenthood knows the same thing that Governor Kelly knows, the same thing that Governor Sebelius knows, who've won 6 statewide elections between them. They know that I'm the only candidate in this race who can build the broad coalition that we need to win a statewide election and to protect reproductive rights. They also know that I will be a brick wall against those Republican attempts to roll back the will of Kansans and the rights that so many of us together fought so hard for. They know my record on this, and they know that I will deliver on this issue as governor.
Thank you again. Our third question. Kansas produces more than half of the nation's sorghum, making it a critical player in both national and global food supply chains. Much of this crop is exported, almost entirely to China. However, tariffs enacted by President Trump wiped out 97% of that market, leaving many farmers struggling. While the market has since partially recovered, many wonder, with agriculture at the heart of Kansas's economy, how will you support farmers and help rebuild our essential export markets?
Helping open markets for American farmers was at the heart of what I did every single day as Chief of Staff of the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce. And when I came back home, I was a fellow at the Dole Institute right here at KU on international trade. I have delivered for American farmers before, and I will do that again as your next governor. We need a governor who understands deeply trade policy, and I am that candidate, and I will be that governor. I was just talking to farmers in Anderson County yesterday, and they were explaining how they are getting crushed by the tariffs, whether it's losing markets that they're trying to sell to, so everything they're trying to sell is getting sold at a lower price. At the same time, the tariffs are making everything they need to buy higher. The tariffs on steel, the tariffs on aluminum. They're making all of their inputs rise in price. And now with the chaos in the Middle East, there is a huge fear among our farmers about what's going to happen to fertilizer prices, to fuel prices. We need a governor who can do what I will do, which is personally lead as many trade missions as it takes to open up markets. And I have the skill set and the background to do that and to deliver. My experience in international trade would have been completely irrelevant at many times throughout our state's history. But in today's world of tariffs and trade wars and Middle East instability, you need a governor who deeply understands what trade means, what market access means to an agricultural-based state like Kansas. You know, I was talking to a farmer in Salina, and she said, you know, the thing that you know as a farmer is that, you know, you're gonna have good years and you're gonna have bad years. But the thing about these tariffs is that they were a complete self-inflicted wound. Had the administration just done nothing at all, this farmer said, it would have been a good year for us. But instead, we have a crisis that was inflicted solely by the administration in Washington that I'm going to be left to clean up as governor, and that's exactly what I will do. We lost over 700 farms in Kansas in 2025. And the thing about losing these markets is that once you lose them, you can't easily just get them back. That's why I'm going to fight so hard as governor to open them. And the thing about tariffs is they affect all of us in this room. You may think, well, if you're not in ag, how do the tariffs affect me? We need to understand that these tariffs are a nationwide sales tax on Americans. And they are making every single thing that all of us buy, from our coffee, to our clothes, to our cars, to our washing machines, more expensive. And so as governor, I'm going to fight to pry those markets open, and I'm the only candidate in this race in either party that has the background and experience to do that and to deliver.
So I grew up on a farm, and I'll say this, I know how hard our farmers work. And we don't grow crops just to let them rot in the field. That's not what we want to have happen. And we've been seeing that occur. So we have to open new markets because some of our farmers, some of those markets they had, they're gone. We've had some recovery, but nowhere near what it was in 2025, and we saw a record number of farm closures. These are the people that feed America, and this is unacceptable, what we've been seeing happening. There are options we can explore. There are new crops that we can explore. Medicinal cannabis, that's a new revenue stream and a new crop for us. But what about this? Every year, our local school districts spend thousands, millions of dollars in prepackaged food that they feed to our kids. When we talk about farm to table, man, there's a great market right there for our farmers. And who's the best person to help navigate this transition? Someone from the farm who understands it, who can talk the language, who's been there. The state also needs to invest in programs for producers to try new things and to look into these markets. Farmers and ranchers know what's best in terms of their land, and they have solutions. I see farmers coming up with creative, innovative ideas, and we need to work with them. Outside the damage that's been done to our markets, producers' costs have gone up. A survey, and I'm going to read this to you so I quote it correctly, a survey from the Farm Bureau just this week found that almost half of farmers in the Midwest can't afford all the supplies that they need for this year. Additionally, 94%, almost all of them, say their financial situation is worse than a year ago. We have to bring the costs down. And there are a lot of new technologies out there that we can be using, that we can work with farmers and help incentivize them. And the state needs to be doing more. And again, the best person to help do that, someone from the farm who talks the language, who knows the issues.
Our final prepared question. Kansas remains one of only 9 states that has not expanded Medicaid, despite repeated efforts to do so. Many residents continue to face barriers to affordable health care. While efforts at expansion have stalled in the legislature. As governor, how would you address health care access in Kansas, and what steps would you take to move Medicaid expansion forward?
I'm actually the only candidate in this race that's gotten Medicaid expanded previously. In my very first term, I worked with a bipartisan group of legislators. After first working with a bipartisan group of women in the Brownback experiment, I went and worked with a bipartisan group of legislators to get Medicaid expansion to the finish line. Unfortunately, Governor Brownback was still here at that point, and he vetoed it. Fell 2 votes short of overriding that veto, and since that time, Republican leadership has done everything they can to stop it from moving forward. But I'll tell you this, I got it passed before, I can do it again. And I've already started working the channels. I'm the most successful Democrat in terms of getting bills to the finish line. That includes my bill that brought the purple alert system to Kansas. Additionally, I worked for 4 years on groundbreaking statute of limitations reform for victims of sexual violence. That bill itself, nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to do this tough job of changing statute of limitations. But I took it on, I worked on it for 4 years, and now more people can go after justice, and we put more perpetrators behind bars. Additionally, as I mentioned, I was a co-founder of the Women's Bipartisan Caucus. We're the group that worked extensively day in and day out for weeks to put together the bill that ended the Brownback experiment. It wasn't easy to do, but we got it done. I want you to keep this in mind. Next year, Dan Hawkins, Speaker of the House, he won't be there. The dynamics of the House, yeah, you can clap for that. Change. And I have a proven track record of getting things done, getting my own bills passed as well as working with others to get other bills passed, including tax relief. And like I said, the dynamics will change in the House. That's going to create opportunities for us. Additionally, I'm working to flip some of those House seats to make it a clear path for us. We have forfeited approximately $7 billion to date because we have not expanded Medicaid. That's money that could have been helping our people right here. It's good economic policy and it saves lives, and I'm committed to getting it done. Kansans across the state work hard and deserve quality care and benefits. I'll work to protect and expand Medicaid and work to ensure that no matter where you are, you have access to health care, because every family in Kansas deserves that type of access, and no parent should have to choose between groceries and a doctor visit for their child. I will be working on this steadfastly. Thank you.
So every single Kansan should be able to get the care they need without going broke and without having to drive hours to get it. You know, this really hit home for me this past fall. We spent 10 days in Western Kansas, and a huge focus of that trip was talking to rural healthcare leaders, to nurses, to healthcare administrators, visiting our small rural hospitals, going to our community health centers, and understanding the immediate and real challenges we already have in our rural healthcare system in Kansas. Understanding that right now, as we sit here today, there is not an OB between Pratt and Denver. There is not a GI doc between Pratt and Denver. And we had just gotten back from 10 days in Western Kansas, and I was pulling in my driveway, and it was 11 o'clock at night. And my wife, Jenna, was coming out of the door, and she was holding a diaper bag and our 2-year-old son, Aiden. And I said, what's happening? What are you doing? And they weren't just excited to see me home. Aiden had developed really severe croup, and he was struggling to breathe. And I'll just tell you, as a parent, there is nothing scarier than when your child is struggling to breathe. And because of the great healthcare access in the community that I'm privileged to live in, we were able to get him the care that he needed almost immediately, and he was fine. But I thought about, what about all those families that I was just visiting in Western Kansas? And what happens when their kids get croup? And the idea of driving for hours with a child who's struggling to breathe to get them the care they need is wrong, it's indefensible, it's immoral. And one of the reasons that we so desperately need Medicaid expansion in our state is that it will help save our rural hospitals, it will help keep providers in those communities, and it will increase access to care in rural Kansas. You know, and a lot of people say, look, Ethan, you know, Governor Kelly fought tooth and nail for this the whole time that she was in office. You know, what makes you think that you can get this done? And I think about what happened in North Carolina. You know, we had a Democratic governor, Governor Roy Cooper. We had a Republican legislature. Governor Cooper worked for 7 years to get Medicaid expansion passed in North Carolina before he finally did it. The key is you can never give up. And as governor, I will never give up the fight for Medicaid expansion. I will continue to put my shoulder to the wheel, and I will put every ounce of energy that I have into expanding Medicaid in Kansas. There are other things, though, that we need to do to improve healthcare in rural areas. As your governor, I will make sure that every single penny of the Rural Health Transformation Initiative funds are spent in a way that helps keep our rural hospitals open and increases access to care in our rural areas. As governor, I'm going to expand loan forgiveness for a broader range of doctors and providers to go treat patients in those rural areas. And we need to have an intentional, deliberate strategy as a state to get more rural kids to go to medical school.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to hand this off to Nick, who will go through our audience submitted questions.
Me again. Having me up here. So we had several students and members of the audience submit questions. I understand that we have over 12 questions at this time, of which we only have time to read about 3 or 4. For those of you who do not have your question read aloud, please understand it's nothing personal. We will be forwarding every single written question that is not answered to the candidates after this event so that they can hear from you regardless. So starting off, we had one submitted by a student organization here on campus. I believe they do have someone in the crowd who will be listening, but their primary question is as follows. In recent years, KU's administration has imposed a contract on our graduate teaching assistants, stalled for nearly 2 years on a contract agreement with our academic staff and faculty, has moved forward unilaterally on the $1 billion Gateway District project, and had 3 pro-Palestinian students arrested and charged with trespassing on their own public schools campus grounds. While both of you have spoken to reverse the damage that Trump, Masterson, and others have done to American higher education on the state level, how do you plan to address universities, including the one that we're at now, taking advantage of this political climate to crack down on the bargaining power, free speech, and protections of their constituents?
I have always stood strong with our union workers and for collective bargaining. That's why I'm the only candidate in this race at either party, Republican or Democrat, with the endorsements from organized labor. I've been endorsed by over 16 labor unions in this state. My opponent's been endorsed by none. Those labor unions collectively represent tens of thousands of working Kansas families, like the families who work at KU. And I'm so proud to have their support because they've worked with me, they trust me, they know me, and they know that as governor, I will continue the fight for better working conditions, for safer working conditions, for improved wages, and to recognize the right to collective bargaining. I also want to end right to work in Kansas, and I want to make sure that these local projects that are done with a local union workforce, especially when our public dollars are at stake. I've always been a champion for organized labor. The very first bill that I got passed in the Kansas Senate, my first year there, was a move-over law to help protect our electrical workers and the utility workers across this state. So I've been a champion for organized labor from day one. I will continue to always fight for the right to organize, to collectively bargain, and to improve working conditions for workers.
Okay, so can I ask you, I thought it was about free speech, but was there other?
Yes, so the question is as follows, and I want to make sure to quote this properly because I know this was a specific question.
Thank you.
Yes, here we go. While both of you have spoken about reversing the damage that Trump, Masterson, and others have done to American higher education on the state level, how do you plan to address universities, including the one we're at now, taking advantage of this political climate to crack down on the bargaining power, free speech, and protections of their constituents?
All right, so thank you for the clarification. Yeah, I'm the only Senate Democrat that brought forward bills this session to push back against some of those bad bills that were being brought forward by the Republicans that were encroaching on free speech. Additionally, like I said, I spoke out against the bad ones they were bringing forward. I was the only one bringing good bills forward to guarantee rights. Of course, with a supermajority, they're going to end up getting their way often on some of these issues. But I think it goes further than that. what you have to consider is, I'm going to show up for people, whatever the issue is. And I will speak to this. You know, we've had ICE raids in our communities across the state. It's scary, it's horrifying, and people across the state have said, even in small towns, that they're horrified by what's happening, that their neighbors are being kidnapped off the streets. So I'll tell you this, about a month and a half ago, we were informed that ICE was showing up at the Boys and Girls Club in Olathe. I didn't have to be in Topeka that day. So I went and stood on the curb for 4 hours. Because I'm not gonna let organizations come in and kidnap my neighbors, because we are seeing overreach out there. Anybody, because of what's going on out there, because there aren't pertinent laws that make requirements of ID, that make requirements in terms of facial coverings, anybody can essentially show up and say they're ICE, even if they aren't. That's dangerous. We should be pushing back against those things. Now, I'm the only Democrat that's been doing it, that's been showing up. But I also want to address something else that was brought up. And I think you all know this. When it comes to endorsements by organizations, by some of these different, by some of these different affiliates that are out there, you guys know this. We have establishments out there. Often these endorsements are done by a matter of who you know and who you're affiliated with, not your record. And sometimes it's who you know and your financial background. And again, I will stack my record up against anybody's when it comes to fighting for our people, when it comes to fighting for union workers. And I am a union member, and I stand proud with that. I fight for the people. I fight for the working families. I fight for our schools. And I will forever stand by that.
This one's pretty straightforward. So, beginning quite boldly, what is your position on large data centers for AI in Kansas?
So, Senator Holscher and I both supported an incentive package to try to attract more data centers to Kansas. I think that this is something that needs to be dealt with at the community level. I think that those data centers may make sense for some communities across our state. They may not make sense for others. But the reality is this: they create a lot of good paying union jobs. And as governor, whenever I have a chance to bring in to our state good paying union jobs, I'm gonna do that. As governor, though, I'm also gonna drive a hard bargain with those data centers with respect to making sure that they pay their way for the energy that they use. I'm also going to make sure that they are signing robust community benefit agreements to make sure that they are contributing back into the communities. So I believe in local control, and I think if a community feels like a data center is a good fit, I support that, and I support the union jobs that come with it. And I want to make sure that we properly protect those communities and in fact actually benefit those communities so those data centers are actually delivering a real positive result for those communities. But this is a chance for Kansas, when it fits, to be part of future economic development. And so I'm one of those people that I stand by my vote. I didn't decide to run for governor and then change my position on a bunch of different issues, whether it was the Chiefs, whether it was data centers, or whether it was something else. And so as governor, you know that I'm gonna say what I mean, I'm gonna vote the way I mean, and I'm gonna do what I say. And I support my vote to bring data centers and the union jobs that they create into Kansas.
So we often have bundled bills in the legislature, and what that means is you often get several things bundled together. Sometimes they're related, sometimes they aren't. And I will tell you, on this particular bill, sometimes there are things in there that you might support, there might be things that you don't. And here's what I will tell you, there has been an absolute rush on data centers. I don't support that absolute rush. We need to be putting the brakes on this and making sure that we are examining things like water usage. We need to make sure we're examining the impact to utility rates and the environment. And again, sometimes we have to vote on bills because there's 3 great things and maybe one thing that's not so great. But if we have bills that stood alone, Might be a little different story in terms of the results that we see on some of these things. But like I said, absolutely, we need careful evaluation. And I like what the Kansas Farmers Union just recently put out. And their policy says, we oppose the development of data centers that increase local electricity rates, cause burnouts, contaminate or deplete water supplies, or exacerbate contamination of water supplies, the sitting of data centers on productive soils. And what we're hearing some people say is, when a data center shows up in their area, it makes the environment uninhabitable. Is that what we want? Uninhabitable? So here's what I say. We've got to bring out the yellow flag on this in terms of making sure we are cautiously examining the implications and making sure we are understanding these things before rushing ahead on some of these issues that we have seen some of our people in the legislature do.
All right, next question. This one is about our farmers. Farmers in rural Kansas are struggling, and some blame it on Democrats. How do you plan to help them as well as gain their vote? We're going to start with you.
Well, I will say it obviously helps being from the farm. And that is something I really underestimate in terms of the impact going across the state campaigning. And I will tell you this, when you're in Western Kansas and you tell folks there that you grew up on the farm, the tension just goes down. When you tell them you can drive a tractor, it's like party time. So, like I said, it does make a difference. When you can talk the language, when you understand the policies, when you understand what it takes, when you have that life experience of getting up at 5 a.m. and doing chores before you go to school, you come home and you do some more chores, like I said, that's huge in terms of that life experience. And looking back, in terms of my time in the legislature and getting bills passed, that's probably why I've been so successful, because I have a lot of areas of commonality with my peers across the state. And when you have those areas of commonality, it's a lot easier to work together and get things done, even if you're on different parties and very different in terms of your political ideology. But like I said, in terms of your question of what do I intend to do to move things forward, I mean, I'm already doing those things. The best ideas come right from the people. The people are always ahead of the politics. And as I said before, a lot of our farmers out there, they have a lot of the answers. A lot of them have already been developing new products and new techniques. We need to be listening more carefully. Our small farmers, they've had to get creative. They've had to do new things. Sometimes it's been the government that's gotten in their way. Could we do more in terms of providing incentives for some of the new technology? Absolutely. And like I said, those are the things I'm looking toward, and helping them find new markets, and in times getting out of their way, like things with medicinal cannabis, opening up some of those markets and helping them make the transitions that they need, because some of their markets have disappeared.
So there is no candidate in this race in either party that has spent more time in rural Kansas on the campaign trail than we have. You know, I've been critical of the Democrats because too often we have abandoned rural Kansas. We have written off large parts of the state. And I think that's wrong. And I think you can never get people to vote for you if you're not willing to show up. And look, I went to community college in Garden City, Kansas. I'm the only candidate in my party who's actually lived in Western Kansas. We've spent more time out there than any other campaign. We're going to be back out there next week. I've been talking to farmers more than anybody else in this race. We were just talking to farmers in Anderson County last night. On Wednesday, we were talking to farmers in Riley County. Last week, we were talking to farmers in Lynn County. We've continued to have these conversations all across the state. And when we show up, what they say most of the time is, you are the only candidate in either party who has actually sat down with us and listened and engaged and had a conversation. And that's how we do things in Kansas, and that's how you make progress. So we're running a different kind of campaign than Democrats in Kansas traditionally have before. We are going everywhere. We are sitting down with everybody. And my experience in Western Kansas matters. When you go out there and you tell them that, yeah, I lived here. I've actually changed a tire on the side of the road between Dodge City and Garden City. There's not a town in western Kansas, large or small, that I haven't played baseball in. And what farmers want is somebody with real plans to deliver results. My experience opening markets around the world so they can sell their products as the chief of staff at the International Trade Administration. My plan to address the water crisis. And so, if you want a candidate who is going to go everywhere, talk to everybody, and campaign everywhere, we'll be back out in western Kansas next week. We've already got meetings scheduled with farmers in Finney County. Because again, the only way that we can make progress as a state, and the only way that we can do better in rural Kansas as Democrats, is by showing up. And I'm the candidate who's done that unlike anybody else in this race.
Our final question for you. Do you support investing in universal early childhood education, ensuring the workforce earns livable wages and that every child has access to care? Specifically, what solutions will you champion as governor?
Absolutely. I mean, we know, and I say this as a parent of two young kids, a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, we know that the ages between 0 and 4, where a huge amount of brain development takes place, and we know that kids who have a solid foundation between those ages are much more likely to achieve success later in life. So there is nothing more important that we can do as a state than take care of our young kids. I was in Manhattan on Wednesday. We recorded a podcast, and the person said, "What do you hope to be remembered as in 5 years? What do you hope that Kansans will say about you?" And I said, I hope that they will say that I was a champion for families and for kids. Because I believe that nobody stands as tall as when they stoop to help a child. And there's nothing more important that we can do as a state than make sure that every young person in our state is on a path to success. So we need to make sure that every kid in Kansas has access to all-day pre-K. That is going to be a priority for me as governor. And look, this is a point of difference. One of Governor Kelly's big accomplishments last session was the creation of the Office of Early Childhood. We finally consolidated all of our early childhood services under one roof. So it's going to be easier for providers. It's going to be easier for parents to access those resources. We are currently standing up that office, and that is going to be a landmark achievement. My opponent was one of the few Democrats who didn't support that. So we have a big difference in this race, and one of them is on this issue around early childhood, because we need to take care of those kids. We need to make those services accessible and affordable. And I want to continue to do things on an innovative way, like we were at Manhattan Technical College. One of the things they're doing on childcare is they're using the technical college to incubate daycare providers before they launch out into the community, to try to allow them to get their feet under them, to try to allow them to get some capital before they have to take on the overhead of their building. We need to be looking at innovative solutions, because as much progress as we've made in increasing childcare across the state, we still have a long ways to go, and I'm committed to continuing down that path as governor.
I have an absolute dedication to ensuring children have access to education, and have worked steadfastly in that. And yeah, there was a bill last year that I did not support. And while yes, it did consolidate certain agencies, it had some language inserted into it at the last minute that was absolutely concerning. And 2 provisions in particular. One provision allowed children to attend preschool without any vaccinations whatsoever. That's a deal breaker to me. I'm not going to support a bill with that language in it. The second provision that was added in rolls back safety regulations for child care providers. Now, I will tell you this. I will make negotiations in good faith, but I will not compromise the health and safety of children, not for political victory. And again, when it comes to ensuring access to education, I've been a warrior. Even prior to running for office, Brownback experiment was happening. I joined with a group of advocates and literally walked from Shawnee to Topeka twice to draw attention to the underfunding of our schools. As a result, we were able to get more people elected to then in the Brownback experiment. After COVID, when we had a shortage of teachers, I saw a need. Some of my friends who taught were covering 2 and 3 classes. I felt that was wrong. I went out and got my sub-license. And on days when I wasn't in session, I went and filled in at my local school, helping in my community. I'm going to do everything I can to help our schools when I'm in the legislature, but I'm going to do what I can in the communities as well. And here's the other thing I will say. Universal access, access to care that you were talking about, universal pre-care, of course. Those are all things I'm going to fight for. And to make more of those things happen, to ensure we're fully funding general ed, because I'll tell you this, while we have adequately funded general ed, just kind of at the bottom level of adequate, we have not funded special ed. Not since 2011, and that hurts our schools. And that means the local level has to make it up, and guess what happens then? Your property taxes go up. You will not see property tax relief with this legislature continuing to deny its obligation on funding our schools. So I'm absolutely committed to making sure that we flip some seats and fulfill our obligation to our students and to our communities and fund our schools the way we're supposed to. And as always, you will continue to see me being a warrior on fighting for our children, and I will not compromise values or principles, not for my political party, not for myself, and not for special interests, because I fight for the people. Thank you.
You're going to tell we're a bit short on mics today. So that does formally conclude our questioning segment of this event. However, for those of you that are here, I would like to say a few things. As an architecture student, I'm clearly not the best public speaker, so thank you for bearing with me throughout this event. We have seen 2 wonderful candidates who both offer great visions for our state, and I hope that this event has given you an amazing glimpse into what they have planned and how you should vote in this upcoming primary. I'd like to say to all of you, thank you for taking the time to come out here today. For the students, thank you for taking time out of your day. I understand it's a very busy time of year for you. For those of you that are interested, we'd love to have you at our next meeting coming up on April 28th. But before we conclude and send you all home, we would like to announce that we will have a brief period until 8 p.m. today for a meet and mingle with the candidates. So for those of you who didn't have your questions answered, for those of you who'd like to talk one-on-ones and would like to get to know them better, now is your chance. So please feel free to break out the groups, meet one another, talk to our wonderful candidates here. We have some great snacks and drinks over by our little table over there. Feel free to help yourself, take any home, and we can't wait to see you again in the future. Thank you so much. So I suppose if we are doing well on time, which we are actually 6 minutes ahead of schedule, so we're good there. We will allow the candidates a brief 2-minute window for closing. So we will begin with you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you for having me. Thank you particularly to the Young Democrat organizations who stepped up to do this. I like to joke with people, you got to be careful going to these Young Democrat meetings because, one day I was a college student going to a Young Democrat meeting with a couple buddies, and it feels like you turn around and the next thing you know, you're running for governor. And maybe some of the maybe older crowd here will understand what the younger people want, which is it all goes by so fast. So I'm particularly excited to be here because at the core of our campaign is the question about what kind of Kansas are we going to leave for our young people? Are we going to leave a Kansas where every young person can go to a great public school and then can go to college, technical college, or a trade school and be prepared to succeed with a good skill set that's going to allow them to enter the middle class? Are they going to be able to find a job right here in Kansas that's not going to make them go look at opportunities in other states? Are we going to allow our young people to experience home ownership, which has been the underpinning of the middle class? Are we going to finally provide affordable, accessible child care, affordable and accessible health care? When I'm governor, the answer to all of those things will be yes. I got into this race because I believe that Kansas is worth fighting for. I got into this race because I believe that as a state, our best days are still ahead. So together, let's write the next great chapter for this state. I would be honored to have your support in the August primary and in the November general election. And thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you all again for having me here tonight. You're likely going to hear a lot about endorsements in this race, and I'm happy to tell you I have over 150 of them, from former governors to legislators to other elected officials. But ultimately, I know this. That's not what really matters to the people. Being able to win the big, tough races and delivering results is what's important. And here's what I know from my past life working at Sprint. Past performance predicts future results. I'm the only one in this race that wins the tough races and the only one that delivers on bringing forward impactful bills and getting them implemented. And here's what I'll leave you with. There's only one candidate in this race that's defeated those incumbents. Those very, very tough races. I've been doing the heavy lifting of delivering actual results for Kansans for close to a decade. And to win in November, you're going to need a fighter. You're going to need someone with a skill set to get it done. And that's probably why a recent poll shows that I have more than a 20-point lead over my nearest competitor. People recognize I know how to win the tough races, and I know how to deliver results by working with others. We're at a critical juncture. You all know it. The MAGA agenda, they're trying to take it everywhere. It's imperative we pick someone in this primary who knows how to win, who's been there before. And I'm the only person who does that, who wins in red districts. And I've done it 4 times. The other side, they're starting to coalesce around Ty Masterson. You can boo if you need to. Is it agenda and ideology or just as terrible as Donald Trump's? But here's the thing I can tell you. That's exactly the type of candidate I beat 4 times in red districts. I know how to handle that. I can handle that. And not only am I committed to winning this race, I'm committed to growing the party. Over the past few years, unfortunately, Democratic numbers have gone down in terms of affiliation and elected numbers in the legislature. However, with me as governor, I will work to bring the growth mindset to this party. After winning my first race in 2016, myself and a couple of friends worked to put a structure in place to get more Democrats elected. We got a structure of PCLs and volunteers in place. And in an 8-year period, we went from 5 elected Democrats to 17. I'm proud to say the work we did helped elect a lot more Democrats, including Senator Corson. And I will bring that growth mindset across the state. Fighting and delivering results, it's what I've been doing, not for insiders, not for the establishment, but for the good people of this state. Our times call for a fighter with bold vision. So I ask you, join with me today. Let's move forward. Let's get some work done. Let's make this a better state. And let's go win, because Jayhawks are winners.